friends. In 8, we're starting something completely different, and we're starting to deal with the metric system. So, the metric system is something that most of the world uses to measure things such as length and weight and all those types of things. In the US, we use the standard measurement. So if I were going to measure something, I would most likely measure it and I would see that it was in inches or feet or yards or miles or something like that. So that's the standard unit of measurement. But in most of the rest of the world, they use something called the metric system. And the metric system is pretty easy once you figure out the main baseline of it. So the metric system it's a base 10 system. So everything's in increments of 10. If you think about inches and yards, you have to think that, okay, 12 inches equals 1 foot, and 3 feet equals 1 yard, and 5,280 feet equal a mile. And those are all really big and random numbers, but in the metric system, it's all in base 10. So you're either multiplying by 10 or by 100 or dividing by 10 or 100 or 1,000, all in increments of 10. So the base unit of measurement in the metric system is meters. So we're going to solely deal with meters today, and then later on in a couple of days, we'll start working on if we were going to measure the volume of something or if we were going to measure the weight of something in the metric system. But today we're just going to focus on the length of something in the metric system. So in the metric system, like I said before, it's all in base 10. So there's 7 main things that you need to know in order to convert measurements. So these letters are all that you're going to need to remember in order to convert measurements. So let me explain a little bit about what each one means. So the K stands for kilo, and it means 1,000. The H stands for hecto, and it means 100. The D stands for deca, and it means 10. And you might put 2 and 2 together and remember that deca sounds like decade, and a decade is 10 years long. So if that helps you remember deca means 10, then that's one way to remember it. The B is our base or our unit. So for length, our base or our unit is meters. So we just leave that one blank. It doesn't have a prefix. Okay? And it just means 1. It's just the standard 1. Then the D stands for deci, and it means a tenth. And deca and dime both start with the letter D, and deca means a tenth, and a dime means a tenth as well, if you'll remember. And then the C stands for centa, and it means 100th. And if you remember when we did decimals, centa kind of sounds like cent, and we said that cent means a penny or 100th. So if that helps you remember, centa means 100th. M stands for milla, milli, and it means thousandth. So all in base 10, kilo means 1,000, hecto means 100, deca means 10, our base is just 1, or our unit. The D stands for deca, which means a tenth, centa stands for 100th, and milli stands for 1,000th. So because the B can either stand for base, or you can think about it as a unit, you can use a B here, or you can use a U here. Okay, and as long as you remember these letters and what they stand for, kilo, hecto, deca, base or unit, deci, centi, and milli, you'll be able to figure out the metric system. So I have a little acronym that it can help you remember these letters. Okay, so if you remember, you can put king, Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. King Henry doesn't usually drink chocolate milk. Okay, so this is one way that you might write it out every time so that you can easily convert, and I'll start showing you how to convert in a few minutes. Or there's a different way of writing it, and that's called the ladder. Okay, so before we just did the plain written out all in one level, but some of you might like this approach a little bit better. This is called the ladder approach, and so you're just going to draw 7 steps, okay, and each step has a different meaning or letter. So the first step is kilo, the second step is hecto, the third step is deca, then comes our unit or our base, which today is going to be meters, deci, centi, and milli, okay? So we won't usually see them written out as centimeter, okay? They won't usually write it all out. They'll usually give you a shortened version or an abbreviation. So we need to know what the abbreviations are. So if you'll remember, in grammar and language arts, we've been learning a lot about prefixes. And prefixes, if you'll remember, are little parts of the words that come first before the main word. So if you'll think back to resubmit, the prefix in that word is re, and then submit is our base word, and the re means again. So they all have a meaning, okay? So these are all prefixes, and they all have a meaning, but we'll see them written as an abbreviation. So instead of writing out decimeter, okay, you will just see DM, and you'll have to know that that means decimeter. But you're saying, oh, Miss Johnson, there's two different ones that start with the letter D. What am I supposed to do? This is where it gets a little bit tricky, and you have to remember this. But decimeter is just a DM. But if they're talking about decameter, okay, you'll see DAM, and you'll have to know that DA, that little part means deca. So each abbreviation has the first letter as what the prefix is, and the second letter is what our unit is, or our base. So all about today, it's going to be meters. That M stands for meters, okay? And the first letter is what's going to tell us. So kilometers will be KM, hectometers will be HM, decameters will be DAM, our unit or our base will just be meters, flat meters. Decimeters will just be DM, centimeters will be CM, and millimeters will be MM. Okay, so you're going to be required to convert them. So let's say that they said that they gave you 547 and 8/10 millimeters, and they say convert that to meters, okay? And you're thinking, how are we going to do that? Well, the base 10 system is awesome with just a few whoop-de-whoops like we've done in the past. It will be so simple, okay? So if we wanted to change millimeters to meters, we would first find our millimeters on this list, and it's right here, okay? And we would see how many whoop-de-whoops it takes to get back to meters, okay? So I would say 1, 2, 3, and I would stop because I'm back to meters, which is my unit or my base, okay? So now I start at the decimal and I go the same direction that I went on my chart, and I move the decimal however many whoop-de-whoops. So in this case, I did 3 whoop-de-whoops, so I'm going to move my decimal 3 whoop-de-whoops. So I would go whoop, 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 and I put my decimal there. So now my answer is 5, 4, 7, 8 meters. So this is the same thing as this many millimeters. I just converted it into meters, okay? And if you'll notice, when I changed it from millimeters to meters, my number got smaller, okay? I'm going to explain that in the next step. Okay, so when we move from step to step or from letter to letter, we're either multiplying by some sort of 10 or dividing by some sort of 10. So if I go from kilo to hecto, I'm timesing by 10. If I go from hecto to deca, I'm timesing by another 10. If I go from deca to my unit, I'm timesing by another 10. If I go from my unit to deci, I times by another 10. If I go from deci to centa, I times by another 10. If I go from centa to milli, I times by another 10. Now let's say if I go from kilo to deca, how many have I gone? Well, I haven't just multiplied it by 10, I've multiplied it by 100. If I go from kilo to my unit, I haven't multiplied it by just 10, or it would be a hecto. I've multiplied it by 3 tens, which is 1,000. Okay? Now, going this way, it's all timesing by 10. But going back, so let's say we're converting from milla to centi, I would be dividing by 10. If I go from centi to deci, I divide it by another 10. If I go from deci to my unit, I divide it by another 10. If I go from my unit to deca, I divide it by another 10, and so forth. So if I started out as milli and I wanted to go all the way to my base unit or my meters, I wouldn't be just dividing by 10, I would be dividing by 3 tens, which is dividing by 1,000, okay? So if that confuses you, just think about the whoop-de-whoops. The whoop-de-whoops are just moving the decimal places, and it's doing the same things, but you don't have to think about multiplying by 10 and dividing by 10, okay? Okay, so now we're going to learn how to convert. We're going to do a few examples just to get you in the groove of it, okay? So we look and we say, okay, our first problem says 2,040 millimeters is equal to how many meters, okay? I remember that mm stands for millimeters, and just a regular m is our base or our unit meters. So I look on my chart up here, and I rewrite this chart every time if I need to, okay? And so I start at milli, because that's where my numbers were, and then I'm going to try to get back to meters, okay? Because that's what it wants me to get back into. So I need to figure out how many whoop-de-whoops it's going to take me to get from milli to meter, okay? So I'm going to start at milli. I'm going to start at whatever my number is that it gives me. And I'm going to go whoop, whoop, whoop. And I stop because I got back to meters, and that's what they wanted me to get into, okay? So then I know that I have to do 3 whoop-de-whoops from somewhere to get my number into meters, okay? So you look and you say, okay, what direction did I move? Well, I started at milli and I went to meter and I moved to the left, okay? I moved to the left, so I have to move to the left on my number, okay? Whichever way you go, keep it consistent throughout the whole problem. So I went 3 whoop-de-whoops to the left, so I need to go 3 whoop-de-whoops to the left to find my new answer, okay? Now, there's no decimal in this answer, so where do I start? I always start at the very end if there's no decimal in my number, okay? So I'm going to do 3 whoop-de-whoops to the left. So I go whoop, 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 and I put my decimal right where the whoop-de-whoops end, okay? And now I rewrite my answer so I know that 2,040 millimeters is equal to 2 40,000 meters, okay? So let's do the next one. 877 centimeters, because cm stands for centimeters, equals how many, just an m, which is meters, okay? So I'm going to go to centimeters on my chart, and I'm going to say, okay, which direction do I need to go, and how many whoop-de-whoops do I need to make to get back to just my unit, or m? Okay, so I go start at centi, and I go whoop, whoop. It took me 2 to get back to my base, okay, or whatever they wanted here. So I went to the left, so I'm going to move to the left on my number, and I'm going to move however many whoop-de-whoops. So I did 1, 2, so I'm going to go whoop, whoop, and I'm going to rewrite my answer. So I know that 877 centimeters is equal to 8 77/100 meters, okay? So let's go on to the next one. So I know that they give me 32, DAM. Did that stand for decameters or decimeters? I have to remember that it stands for decameters and not decimeters and not get confused. So I know that I'm going from decameters to kilometers. So I start at where they give me, and the number is at decameters, and they want me to get to kilometers. So I have to go to kilometers. So I have to go, how many whoop-de-whoops does it take to get from deca to kilo? And that's 2, and I move to the left. So I'm gonna go start at the very end because there's no decimal in my number, and I'm gonna go 2 whoop-de-whoops to the left. 1, 2, and put my decimal. So I know that 32 decameters is equal to 32 hundredths of a kilometer. Okay, let's do one more. So it starts me out at kilometers, and it wants me to get back to my base of meters. So I say, okay, I'm starting at kilometers, and I'm trying to get back to my base. So I'm gonna see how many whoop-de-whoops it's gonna take me. 1, 2, 3. But this time I went to the right. So I have to remember to go to the right on my number here. So it took me 3 whoop-de-whoops to the right, so I'm gonna do 3 whoop-de-whoops to the right here. Because my number has a decimal, I start at the decimal. So I'm gonna go whoop, whoop, whoop. Okay, and put my decimal. Now, you'll notice that one of my whoops had a 6, but the other 2 whoops have nothing in them. I just put a 0 and write my number, okay? So I know that 8.6 kilometers is the same thing as 8,600 meters. So by going from kilometers to meters, I multiplied by 10 again, and by 10 again, so I ended up multiplying it by 1,000. 8.6 times 1,000 is the same thing as 8,600. Okay, so we're going to go through this first problem, and if you've got to this point in the video, then you're going to be super grateful that you're watching this because this is one of your homework problems, okay? So let's just read the problem first. It says, Jenny knitted a scarf that was 2 7/10 meters long. She made an identical scarf every month for 2 years. How many centimeters of scarf had she knitted all together by the end of 2 years, okay? And then it says, how many meters of scarf did Jenny knit in 1 month? Okay, so we got to figure out how many meters she knit in 1 month. Well, it says right here that Jenny knitted a scarf that was 2.7 meters long. So that was one scarf, and she made an identical scarf every month. So she made a 2.7 meter long scarf every month. Okay, so how many meters of scarf did Jenny knit in 1 month? Well, just 2.7 meters, right? Then it says, for how many months did Jenny knit? Well, we know 2 years, and we know how many months are in a year. We know January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So we know for each year, there's 12 months. So we know that she did it for 2 years, so 2 times 12 is 24. So we know she did it for 24 months, okay? Then it says, how many scarves did she knit during that time? So if she did a scarf that was 2.7 meters long, okay, and for 24 months, 1 for each month, how many scarves did she end up doing? Well, how many months are there? 24, so she did 24 scarves, okay? Then it says, how many meters is that? Well, each one is 2.7 meters, and if she makes 24 of those, how could we figure out how many meters it took her to make 24 whole scarves? I have to think. It wouldn't be divide because it needs to get bigger, right? So we need to multiply. So we're going to multiply 24, because that's how many she made, by 2.7, because that's how long they were. Okay? Now, if you remember, when we multiply by a decimal, okay, we can't just put it straight down and then count it as good in our product, right? We have to get it out of the problem, solve the problem, and then put our decimal back in. So I have how many to the right of the decimal? 1 spot, right? So if you'll remember, we put a 1 in a circle, and now we just forget about the decimal and we just solve the problem. So I say, what's 7 times 4? Oh, that's 28. So I put an 8 and I carry my 2. What's 7 times 2? That's 14. Add 2, which is 16. Now I don't have any more numbers to multiply my 7 by, so I have to put a place value filler down there because I'm done with my 7. Then I move over to the 2. What's 2 times 4? Well, I know that's 8. Moving on, what's 2 times 2? Oh, that's 4. Now, I have two partial products, so I have to add up my partial products. 8 plus 0 is 8. 6 plus 8 is 14, so I put my 4 down here and carry my 1. 4 plus 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Now, I can't just have my answer of 648 because I did have a decimal up here. So because I circled 1 and there was one place to the right of the decimal, I have to put my decimal back in one place. So I whoop one place and I have 64.8 as my answer, and they were looking for how many meters. So I have to label it as meters, okay? Then the next part of the problem says, how many centimeters of scarf did Jenny knit in 2 years? Well, I just figured out how many meters she did in 2 years. So now all I need to do is convert my meters to centimeters. So I have to use my chart up here again. So I start at meters, which is my unit, and I have to go to centimeters. So I have to see how many whoop-de-whoops it takes me to get from meters, or my unit, to centimeters. So I go whoop, whoop. I went 2 whoops to the right, okay? So I have to go 2 whoops to the right in my number to figure out how many centimeters I have. So I go starting at the decimal, because this number has a decimal, I go whoop, whoop. One of my whoops has a number in it, but the other one doesn't, so I just have to put a 0 in there. And now I know that I have 6,480 centimeters that I used for my scarves for 2 whole years. Okay, so this is our next problem, and this is also one of your homework problems, or very similar to one of your homework problems. Okay, so let's read it. It says, a European swallow flies about 11 meters in 1 second. How many kilometers could it fly in 15 minutes? So this is a multi-step problem, so we have to do a couple steps in order to get the problem solved correctly, okay? So first, I know that it gives me 11 meters, okay? It flies 11 meters in 1 second, okay? And eventually, I need to get to kilometers, okay? And I need to get to 15 minutes, okay? I'm looking for how many kilometers. So first, I need to convert my meters to kilometers, so I'm talking about the same thing that they're wanting me to talk about, okay? So I'm gonna take 11 meters and I'm gonna figure out how I'm gonna get it to kilometers. So I start at meters because I know it's my unit, and I see how many whoop-de-whoops I need to do to get to kilometers, okay? So I go whoop, 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 and it took me 3 whoop-de-whoops to the left. So I'm gonna do 3 whoop-de-whoops to the left for my number to convert it to kilometers, okay? So I go, because 11 has no decimal, I start at the end and I go whoop, 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 and I put my decimal. Now, 2 of those whoops have a number, but the third one doesn't, so I put a 0 in there, and I'm gonna rewrite the problem. So now I know that the European swallow flies 11 hundredths of a kilometer per 1 second, okay? So I've got it converted into kilometers, but now I've got to do something about my seconds and my minutes, because 1 second is not the same as 15 minutes, okay? So in order to get it to be to seconds to minutes, I have to think about how many seconds are in a minute. And I know that there's 60 seconds in a minute, okay? So I'm going to multiply my kilometer number by 60 to figure out how many kilometers I get in 1 minute or 60 seconds. So I'm going to take 11 hundredths times by 60, because there's 60 seconds in 1 minute, okay? So I'm going to say this times 60. Now, I notice first off that I'm doing a multiplication problem and I have a decimal. So I have to get rid of the decimal so that I can do the problem. So I figure out how many places to the right of the decimal I have. 1, 2, 3. And I put a little 3 and circle it. Now I just forget about the decimal and just do the problem like regular. So because there's a 0 and I don't want to multiply 0 by 3 numbers and get 0, I'm just going to put a 0 at the very end and then I'm going to move on. That's my placeholder. Okay, that shifts all the numbers. So now I'm going to say, okay, what's 6 times 1? Well, I know that's 6. What's 6 times 1? I know that's 6. What's 6 times 0? Oh, that's 0. Now, this is not my answer, if you'll remember, because I have a decimal and I have to put my whoop-de-whoops back in. So I know that there were 3 places to the right of the decimal here, so I have to do 3 whoop-de-whoops back into my answer. So I go from the far right side, I go whoop, 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 and I put my decimal. So now I know that 660 thousandths kilometers is equal to 60 seconds, which is also a minute. So now I've got it into minutes, but 1 minute is not the same as 15 minutes. So now I have to convert this, because the European swallow flies 660 thousandths of a kilometer in 1 minute. So now we got to figure out how many they do in 15 minutes. So I have to multiply this whole number by 15, okay? So I'm going to make some room for myself. Okay, and I'm going to take 660 thousandths times by 15 so I can figure out how many kilometers it goes in 15 minutes, because this right now is only for 1 minute. So I notice that I'm multiplying and I have a decimal, so I have to get rid of the decimal. So I see how many places to the right I have of my decimal. I have 1, 2, 3. So I put a little 3 in a small circle at the top, and I forget about my decimal for now. So now I just solve it. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 6 is 30, so I put a 0 and I carry my 3. 5 times 6 is 30, plus 3 is 33. Now because I'm done with the 5, I have to put a place value holder down here. My place value holder is always 0. Now I move on. What's 1 times 0? Oh, that's 0. What's 1 times 6? That's 6. 1 times 6 is 6. I don't have any more numbers to multiply, so I have to add up my partial products. 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. 3 plus 6 is 9. 3 plus 6 is 9. Now, is this my final answer? Nope, I forgot my decimal. So I have to put 3 whoop-de-whoops back in. Starting from the far right, I go whoop, whoop, whoop. And I rewrite my answer. So now my answer is 9.9. I could write those 2 zeros at the end, but I don't need to. 9.9 is equivalent to 9.900, okay? So I say 9.9 kilometers equals 15 minutes. And I just solved the problem.